Welcome to the Rising Latterly podcast.
Each episode, you will learn something fascinating so you can bring big ideas to your small talk.
Your growth is our growth. Listening to these episodes, subscribing to our weekly newsletter, engaging our posts on social media, and sharing our show with your friends and family is deeply appreciated as we work hard to expand this platform. You can also visit our page at buymeacoffee.com to contribute what you think the show is worth.
To the folks who are taking this step, we can't thank you enough. Look for the link in our show notes for more details about how you can support and follow us.
And now, please enjoy this episode.
Joining us from Elora, Ontario, today's guest is Wayne Simpson. Wayne is a photographer determined to tell meaningful stories through portraiture, staying true to his subjects as he combines art and compassion together as one. His images and stories often tackle difficult topics in hopes of helping those who may be struggling. Wayne's work has been published in such magazines as Outdoor Photography, Canadian Geographic, and Canadian Rockies Annual. Photographer Dave Brosha once remarked that, quote, few people understand the notion of story in portraiture as well and can create art as complex from a seemingly simple mix of light, expression, setting, position, and perspective as Wayne Simpson. Along with being an artist and educator, Wayne is a dedicated husband and a proud father to two daughters. His forthcoming book is entitled Resilient, The Portraiture of Wayne Simpson. It's Wayne's first published collection of portraits. It's an outstanding body of work that really captures the miraculous resilience of the human soul through portraiture and storytelling. It's a resilience that, as we see in the book, can endure even the greatest of tragedies and hardship. Wayne, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's really wonderful to have you. First off, I'd love to learn a little bit about your backstory and how your passion for photography came to be. Can you recall, Wayne, the first time you picked up a camera?
Like a lot of people, it's kind of that classic tale of, my mom gave me a little point and shoot camera and I just blazed through a bunch of rolls of film and I was in love. But really when it started was in college. I went through for graphic design and I found that in a lot of my designs, I needed images. And so rather than, going searching for them, I started making them. So that was kind of the beginning.
Interesting. Yeah. And when did you get into portraiture exactly? Because that seems like a kind of a beast in and of itself.
Yeah. That came a little later. I actually started with more landscapes and things like that. Portraiture, how long has it been now? I'd say about 12 years I've been doing that.
Oh, wow.
Give or take.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, no, we were really impressed with the work. A lot of just beautiful images there. I'd love if you could perhaps walk us through your process as an artist. So maybe take us through from the moment you set eyes on someone that you think could be an interesting subject and just what draws you to a person to begin with. And from that first moment, let's go all the way to the moment where you have this finished, gorgeous portrait in hand where you feel like you've truly captured the essence of this human being and it's ready to be shared with the world.
Right. Yeah. First of all, I think everybody has this feeling when you're walking down the street or wherever you are. There's people that just kind of stand out and make you do a double take. And that's kind of my first sign, I guess, that I recognize like there's something there. And the type of people that I'm really drawn to are, as you can see in the book, is people that have a lot of character and story visible on their face. Before you even learn the story, there's a story. So yeah, the first thing I would do is try not to be creepy. Approach the person in a way that is very human. Just make some small talk about the weather, whatever, and then kind of gradually get to the photography part. And a lot of times, I'll just say something like, I'm a photographer. I love to photograph people that have a lot of character. And I couldn't help but notice that you have something about you that is just amazing. I would love it if I could photograph you. Wow. And I make sure that I point out that, that I'm not going to charge them and I tell them what's in it for them. I'm going to actually share the images with them and all that stuff. And I like to carry my phone with me with my whole portfolio on my phone, so I can show them, kind of what to expect.
That's smart.
Yeah. So, and I don't think I've ever actually photographed somebody on the spot. It's always kind of, I see them, I approach them, we have the conversation, and then I kind of leave the ball in their court usually to follow up and get back to me. I really dislike pressuring people. I feel like if I pressure someone, I'm not starting out the right way,
Yeah,
Right.
totally.
I like to have an element of trust right from the beginning.
And sorry, one quick question there. Do most people say yes, Wayne, when you position it like that?
Yeah, surprisingly. I've had a couple that have said no, and that can really hurt sometimes, especially when you see a lot of potential there.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, most have said yes.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, so they said yes, and then maybe you get a date on the calendar, and how does it kind of pan out from there?
So yeah, I guess the next thing is I like to have a conversation with them and learn more about them. And I always try to have an element of story in my portraits. So the more I learn about them, the better. And once I am on location, like we usually choose a location that means something to them or has some kind of a relevance. Anything that can add to the story will include. One example, Geraldine Robertson, who has sadly passed on now, she was a survivor of residential schools.
Yeah.
And one problem we had is I wanted to photograph her actually in front of the residential school, which still stands. It's turned into a cultural center now. And they would not allow me to do it. So I had to find a way around that. So what I did was I actually had Geraldine hold on to a book that had images of both schools actually that she attended. And so, that had some relevance and actually made the connection to the location. So it's just a picture of her hands. She was in her 80s, so there's a lot of character in her hands, and then the book itself. So there's a story right there.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And for our listeners who may not be familiar with the residential schools, just so they can kind of understand the gravity of Geraldine's story, can you tell us a little bit about what those were?
Yeah, so children were actually taken from their families, Native children, and they were forced into these residential schools. And basically, they were not allowed to speak their native tongue. They had to cut their hair. They weren't allowed to dress in any kind of traditional type of dress. And basically, the government and the churches tried to take the native out of the natives,
Yeah.
in essence. And Geraldine was just an amazing woman because she lived through this. She had nightmares for 70 years after, reoccurring nightmares. And she would actually go to schools and stand up and tell her story, and was often in tears. So she really put herself out there for the good of other people to really try to educate people.
Wow.
So yeah, and one part of that history that's really sad is, there tends to be a lot of Native people that have drinking problems or homelessness or drug addiction, and a lot of that really stems from this whole thing, from dealing with the residential school experience and the way it passes through the different generations and affects people. So It's a really, really sad thing.
You have to talk about sad things though, and horrible things, because that's when, awareness comes about. So talking about things that are painful is how people can actually develop more compassion, empathy, and respect for each other, and respect for things that are happening around the world. So sometimes, you have to have those tough conversations. And, just a couple things that you've said so far have stood out. Number one, you mentioned early on that instead of searching, you went to go make it. I love the fact that you're a practitioner, right? You actually did something. You also mentioned stories and storytelling. And I think that the portraits in your book really just the portrait alone told stories, as you were talking about. But let's talk about storytelling for a second, because Jay and I and all the guests that we've had recently, we've been exploring storytelling pretty deeply on the podcast, because, you know, it's what saved us from the brink of extinction 70,000 years ago, along with the art that came through the, you know, in the fossil records that we see. My question to you is, what is your view on storytelling today and the spread of misinformation? I mean, what's your approximation? Like, what can we do to stop the spread of toxic ideas? Because it's storytelling that can save us or it's going to destroy us. And so, given that you had an entire book with portraits and stories, I figured I'd ask you, where are we headed in the storytelling direction here?
Right. I think first and foremost, we need to listen to our elders. That is so huge. I mean, I like to believe that we all kind of have a moral compass, and we know what things are good and what things are bad, and what stories to believe and not believe. But it's our elders that I think are the key. And I think that's what has really, I never thought about it till right now, actually. What drew me to a lot of my subjects, you probably noticed that a lot of the people in my book are elderly.
Yeah.
And
they all had beards. That's what I noticed.
I always thought that it was the character that I was drawn to, but I think a lot of it actually is the knowledge and the fact that there is story there.
Absolutely.
There was a line that came from your book that I wanted to share that touches on that, which is your ability to actually showcase other people's light. I feel like I'm going to take that line from your book and experiment with it. In other words, humanize people, give them more of a voice. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways I got from your book.
Yeah, well, that's great. This whole experience of, I mean, the experience of writing this book came fairly innocently. I don't think I really knew what I was getting into and what kind of a life-changing experience it was going to be. But I can say without a doubt now, having completed it, absolutely life-changing. To sit down with people that have been through, drug addiction, eating disorders, tragic loss of family, major concussions, human trafficking, all these things I would never have had the opportunity to learn about before and educate myself about. And I actually was able to sit down with these people and have real conversations. And it was extremely enlightening.
You really got to know the backstories of these people. It's incredible, I think, what they were willing to open up and share with you. And some of the stories, as you mentioned, were really hard to read. I mean, just absolutely horrifying stuff, abuse, sexual abuse at very young ages, devastating. I think a lot of times we find ourselves maybe talking with a friend or a family member or, even a colleague or acquaintance that has gone through something that we haven't. Maybe it's like the person at work that's dealing with cancer and you've never had cancer. Or I even think about my own life. I've had several friends that have lost their father, and I still have my father. And, I want so desperately to be present with them. And I've wanted that in those situations, to be like a supportive force to convey my compassion. And it can be hard sometimes to find the right words and to know how to navigate those conversations. So I'm curious, for someone like you that's been able to have and create that space for people to speak with you authentically and freely about deeply personal pain, what advice can you give us, to the many of us who may find difficult conversations hard to navigate? And we want nothing more than to convey our compassion for people, but we may feel a little bit out of our element if we haven't gone through the same thing.
I would say the most effective thing you can do is just listen. Just be there and just listen. I always felt like I had to come up with something to say to comfort people. And all these people that I have interviewed and photographed in the book, I basically, I didn't know them really before having the interview. So in essence, I kind of just listened. And a common thing that I heard from them was how therapeutic it was for them to just be able to just talk. And that really struck me. It really made me think about, like you said, when things hit closer to home, how to deal with those, different tragedies and friends and family that are dealing with it.
Yeah.
I would say just listen.
Yeah. And then listening is obviously key. And then as a result of reading something like your book, what you can do in the future is now you have more of an ability to pull from different archetypes. So this book really made me realize like there's another way of viewing archetypes that exist in the world, and realizing how so many people are just walking around every day with so much baggage, trauma, violence, assault, whatever the case may be. But when you read something like your book and you see these pictures and faces, what happens is you become better equipped to have more caring conversations, because simply being aware that there are people existing out there that, have been raped 100 or more times in a given night or over a course of 3 days, for example, like just being able to know that people are out there, you're going to be better equipped to be able to connect the dots for people as you find yourself in a therapist role, or if you find yourself in a super deep emotional conversation with someone. So just being able to pull and being able to be just better equipped with these stories. I mean, I feel like my empathy muscle was being strengthened while reading through your book and seeing those pictures.
I love that you just said that. That warms my heart, because that was the purpose of the book, is to give other people these tools, basically, to realize that there's other people in the world that are going through a lot of things, and to know that, we're all just people. We're all in this together, and we need to care for each other. So yeah, thank you for saying that.
There's this idea of like sonder that I heard maybe a few years ago now. I think it's like a fairly new word that's entered the lexicon, but it means the realization that each random passerby is living a life as vivid and complex as your own. And in line with Arjun's comments and really the mission of your book, that word kept coming back to me as I was reading it, because you realize, like, you see the outside, you see the exterior of people that are walking by you in the day to day, but everyone has such like a rich backstory to their lives. There's so many people, so many stories. The world that we occupy is just replete with all these amazing people that have gone through incredible things. And I think the way that culture is set up right now, we're trained to focus on a very small number of people. Like there's only so many politicians or actors or artists that kind of fill the public space, and all our eyes are meant to be looking at them. But, if you start to look around you, you're like, whoa, there's so many just hidden gems, all around me in the world.
Absolutely. That was a big realization for me. In the beginning, like I mentioned, I would see somebody and see story on their face. Mm-hmm. But as I kind of matured as an artist and really started opening my eyes, I started to see that people that I could pass on the street and I would never do a double take have these amazing stories, things you would never expect. And a lot of them are actually right here in this town. Like there's so many amazing stories out there.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So in the course of your work, did some words change for you? So maybe when you started the project, you had a different definition of resilience or grit. And then throughout the project, those words take on a different meaning for you. And what do those words mean to you now?
It's a good question. I would say one word has kind of changed, the word character. I originally saw that as more of a visual thing, somebody with a lot of character on their face, but it kind of transcends that now, and I see it as part of the personality and part of the entire being of the person, that there's a lot more to people, and we need to give a lot more credit to them.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because the word that kind of changed a little bit for me was resilience. It's like most of the time you think about overcoming something, but resilience also means just standing there and taking it and sticking through something as well. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the subjects that was actually, I think, the first subject in your book, Glenn Hallman. You spotted him in a Tim Horton and ended up learning that Glenn had been homeless for 50 years. I think a lot of us can't imagine being homeless for like 50 hours, and to just put put ourselves in his shoes. Living outside in old age, fending for himself all the time alone, all the brutal winters. It was humbling just contemplating how much he had to stomach to just stay alive, and how he went through most of his life without any recognition for this incredible battle that he was fighting. I mean, a real warrior, and despite his hardship, he seemed to have maintained a sort of lightness about him and optimism about the future. And you ended up forging a relationship with him, which I think is a testament to the friendships you build with your subjects.
Yeah. Glenn was a really, really neat man. As you mentioned, I saw him in a Tim Hortons. He was just kind of sitting in the corner. I had no idea in that moment that he was homeless. I was just drawn to the way he looked. He had this straw hat on, a big white beard, and these piercing blue eyes I could see from across the restaurant. He was 88 when I met him. Glenn, yeah, he had this youthfulness to him. It's really hard to describe. He just had all these goals, things he wanted to do in life, and age was not a factor. Money was not a factor. He just wanted to do these things. Yeah, he would write me every 2 weeks. When I left, I really didn't think I'd hear from him again, but 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. Every 2 weeks, it was like clockwork. Every 2 weeks, there'd be this big beige envelope.
Yeah, you mentioned death, taxes, and a letter from Glenn.
Yep, the only sure things in life. Yeah. What a neat man.
Yeah.
What was really, really cool, and this really opened my eyes to the power of portraiture and social media, I guess. So I photographed Glenn, and as you mentioned, I kept in touch with him. But I posted his picture on Facebook, and shared kind of a bit about his story. So that picture really got around on social media, and people started to recognize Glenn in different places. He was somewhat transient. He would find a way to get to different towns all around the country. So I would get these emails randomly all the time, like, "Oh, hi, I just wanted to let you know I saw Glenn in Thunder Bay, Ontario. We invited him in for Thanksgiving dinner." Wow. Or somebody else, gave him a ride somewhere. Somebody else
cool. Wow.
Did his laundry. So there, just because of this portrait being out there and his story being told, this man had like this little army of people out there looking out for him. Wow. Which I just love that. So cool.
That is one of those things that I think we can build on, because you talk a lot, or in my perspective, it felt like you were talking a lot about lives that have once been lost. I think that was a big theme in your book, whether it's people that, I think the biggest thing that people can relate to is anyone who's struggling with addictive drug use right now. So like those are people that are considered people that are weak, or they have other issues. And I just think that if we can just relate to more people who seemingly have a life that's lost, that might be something that people can take away from this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I for one, I look at what people have overcome, and I don't want to say I judge them. I don't judge people, but I see the strength in recovering from something like that, as opposed to the weakness of, falling into that dark hole, so to speak. So yeah,
so if we can get these
agree.
Stories out, then it can kind of create more of like a support system. So
yeah. I think it's very much a individualistic culture. It's been that way for a long time. The idea of like the human tribe is kind of been defunct for thousands of years, but even I think community is starting to hit a decline right now. I think people are less connected to others. People are living, especially with COVID now, living much more atomized lives. They're in their own family unit, not necessarily tied to a church or, some other kind of organization within their town. I think people, especially young people, are living on their own. And to Arjun's point about us kind of looking past people that have been lost, I think that there are a lot of people out there right now that need really nothing more than just the human connection and just support. And maybe in a different era, there would have been community there that could have come up under them and rallied around them. And given the fact that we're all sort of living as our own little singular units, a lot of those people that get kind of washed out of society, it's really hard for them to re-enter. So creating space for them to re-enter without stigma, I think, is really important. And obviously it takes a lot of not just destigmatizing, but truly helping people, like actually, doing Glenn's laundry or providing, a meal for someone in the neighborhood that may not be doing so well. It really requires action, which is something I think we can all do together. If everyone kind of does a small action for someone they know out there that is struggling, those build up over time.
For sure. I think we all have one thing in common, is that we all want to be seen, and a lot of these people, like you said, they just kind of fall by the wayside and they're not seen.
Yeah.
Or at least they don't think they are. If they know they're being seen and appreciated, I think that's a huge deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's why this was kind of dark and heavy at times, because it dealt with real people and real things that everyone's dealing with. And so to me, just thinking about this conversation, thinking about the book and preparing for it, I was like, damn, it really is actually hard work to be genuinely nice, kind, and compassionate. Like, it takes practice, it takes time, it takes an effort, and you have to be able to take things on and connect the dots for people. Like, these words are just tossed around, like be kind, be compassionate. Like, it's easy to do, but it's really a lot of work, and it takes like an effort to be able to take on what somebody's saying, connect the dots for them so that they can actually move on in their life. And I guess, like, if you do it enough, it becomes second nature. And once it becomes second nature, that's when maybe like you yourself have some peace, because you're actually out there helping people. So it seems so uplifting, but there's so much heavy lifting that has to take place for you to be truly nice, truly compassionate, and truly kind to someone.
Absolutely. Yeah. There were times during this, I have to commend my wife for her patience and sticking by me through this. It was very heavy emotionally. I remember one specific case, Leona's story. She's a survivor of human trafficking. That one was very, very difficult for me. She talked about the abuse in her life starting as early as the age of 4. And I kind of connected the dots as she was telling me the story. And my daughter was 4 at the time. Oof. And it really got to me. I was in tears. We were all in tears. Her mom was there as well during this interview. With their permission, I record these interviews so that I can, accurately write later. And on the way home, I listened to it again, and I couldn't go home. Wow. I had to pull over and I had to spend some time with my thoughts, and it took me a while to get home. I couldn't keep it together. So, it can be very heavy, but one thing I noticed is the more I listened and the more I, whenever I was able to help somebody, it was like this muscle that, I kept working out, and it did become second nature. I started to feel like a better person. I had a lot more pride, and I didn't hesitate to help people. So yeah, there's something to be said for kind of continuing it. Once you start, it becomes second nature, I'd say.
That's awesome, because it probably helped you become more of the person you really are at your core. And that's what I think a lot of people in society are trying to figure out right now. Everyone wants to be their authentic selves. Everyone wants to live their best life. I think people still struggle with that. So do you have any advice just on your experience of how someone can just stay true to who they are, or figure out a way to pull more of that out of them so they can bring that to the world?
It's a good question. I think one thing I've started to do is definitely be vulnerable. Put myself out there more, and that is incredibly freeing to just be vulnerable. And then when you're speaking with people that are going through something rough, if you're able to share with them, a piece of yourself, then all of a sudden you're making this connection, and you're forging a relationship in that moment. Sorry, just a sidetrack here. One byproduct of this whole experience that I never really thought of at the time was how this would all affect my kids.
Oh.
And I think it's been really good, actually. They have seen their dad helping people, and they, I like to think that it's helping them understand what's important in life and to be good to people. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have any kids, but I would imagine they're watching you more than they're listening to you. So if they're watching you do these things, that's going to have a lasting impact.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious, what do they think of your portraiture? Like seeing it through the child's eyes, what are their reactions?
They don't really have a reaction anymore. I've seen so much of it. It's just like, oh yeah. But what I do like is, we'll be in town or something, and one of them will say, "Oh, look, Daddy, there's the man that you helped."
Oh, wow.
And so they remember these stories.
Wow,
Yeah.
that is so cool. Yeah. Quite an impression to make on them at such a young age. It's such a great way of being to instill in young people. That's awesome. Well, getting kind of back to the process, taking it from that moment where you've met the person, you kind of get an understanding of their story all the way through finishing the portrait. I think it's really interesting. Like, I think when people think of artistry, they may think of painters, and painters kind of have a sort of vision in their head that they're trying to put down on canvas, and they're sort of pulling something out of their imagination and putting it down on paper. And you're not working with paint necessarily, but you are working with your imagination and trying to take these living, moving, breathing subjects in the real world and capture it in the form of a composition. So the lighting, where the subject is positioned, what elements are included in the background, all of those seem to be very intentional choices that are serving a certain mood that you're trying to conjure. And I'm curious, as you're making that happen, does the whole image come to you ahead of time where you're like, yeah, that's going to be the shot, and now I need to figure out how to put that together? Or is it very dynamic as you're trying to figure out how to capture the spirit of the subject? Are you kind of reading the room, reading the subject in the moment, experimenting and seeing what works as you go, and then kind of bringing it all together at the cutting room floor, so to speak?
Right. Yeah, it's usually the first one you said, usually more intentional. Yeah, usually I can walk into a space and kind of visualize, where I would put my lights, how I would bring the mood. And then a lot of it has to do with what is in the space that adds to the story. Now, that being said, there's one shot of Leona where it was more of a like spur of the moment thing. It's a close up of her, and she has tears in her eyes. And it's actually, she's telling me in that moment that she was so focused on her own safety and her own well-being as a kid in an abusive household that she never even thought of the fact that her brother might be going through the same kind of stuff. And so in that moment, she's telling me how guilty she feels that she didn't help him, and she's in tears. And that's when I got that shot. So I intentionally kind of set it up, but I watch for the moments within that setup.
That makes sense. Yeah, really. I mean, some of the pieces are absolutely incredible. They all really capture the spirit of the subject. And I noticed just, some of the way the lights come out in the background, or way details, in the environment come out in the background. I just have a tremendous appreciation for the kind of balance of these photographs and the way that you capture people in their natural environment. It's just fascinating everyone's familiar with the idea of a picture being worth 1,000 words, but you look at these people's faces, and on a human level, you're feeling like you're looking into something that's so much more than a picture. It's kind of like a portal into their world. It's really cool.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
That's one thing I didn't in the very beginning, before I started actually writing. I was kind of the belief that a picture can kind of stand on its own and tell the story. But as time went on and I started writing, I really gained an appreciation for just how much further you can take it and how much more impactful it can be. So, I'm really proud of that, actually.
Speaking of how much further you can take it, using those words, one of the components of your book that I really appreciated is that not everything was like a complete story. So you would just have a picture with like one question and one answer. And so, I wrote some of these questions down that I wanted to share, because people can then take these questions to their normal everyday conversation and take it further. So just simple questions like, what are you most proud of? Asking people, what are you most proud of? What is your greatest gift as a person? What is one thing you wish everyone knew about you? What gives you strength? What is your biggest fear? What has been your biggest challenge? What makes you happiest? What is your life philosophy? What has been the most meaningful comment that someone has given you? What is the best advice you could give someone? What is what's your biggest regret in life? And what do you want your legacy to be? Those are just a handful of questions where if you take that to your normal everyday conversation, using your words, you can just take it one step further. I thought that was awesome.
Thank you.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you, Wayne, what are you most thankful for in your life?
I would say my two girls. It sounds like a cheesy answer, but it's the truth. They give me purpose. They make me check myself all the time, make sure that I'm, my moral compass is aligned correctly.
Yeah.
No, I just, my girls. Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say that the birth of your daughters was like the biggest change you've ever had to go through? What are some other moments in your life that you're willing to share that involve big changes, and where have some of those changes taken you?
Yeah, definitely the birth of my girls was huge.
I've heard it's life-changing. I've heard having kids is life-changing.
What I couldn't believe was, so you have this brand new baby, and then I couldn't believe they were letting me leave with her, leave the hospital. Like, I'm not ready for this. I drove down the highway like an old man, looking back to make sure she was okay the whole time. And it just blew my mind that all of a sudden I could just leave with this child, and there's not somebody that's gonna like tell me how to do things right. So.
Yeah, right. That is so funny. I also wanted to ask you, Wayne, what are you working on now? I know this was your very first collection of portraits that's been published. Do you have the next project in mind, or are you just going to kind of keep going and then see what themes emerge out of the art you put together?
I've got a couple of ideas. One of them is, concentrating on not such tragic stories, but more good. Just a book that just brings a lot of good. I have ideas for that. I guess it's all dependent on, if my publisher is into it and how that all works out. But I haven't actually brought the idea to them yet.
Yeah, gotcha. Cool. Yeah, kind of yin and yang piece. That'd be really cool.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and it's I've realized writing this first book that it takes a toll on me, and I need to give myself some space and understand that my own mental health is important, and one person can only take so much before they need a little bit of a break. So that was kind of the the reason for sort of pivoting and thinking of a more upbeat kind of a theme. So
Yeah.
Imagine you went through that entire exercise and, you know, that entire experiment, and you're taking a break and it took that mental toll. You know, some people might have a mental toll just the moment they realize that they've been walking around their entire life with blinders on. Just that fact alone, just becoming more aware that they've been just walking around without even realizing what's going around, that alone might shock people to the point where they need a break. So, you know, it's like people are all over on the spectrum in terms of just their awareness of being able to like even be compassionate with the person next to them, let alone go through an entire book and the entire experience and carrying all the weight and then taking breaks. I just find it very interesting where people are on their spectrum of awareness, because it just kind of reflects the spectrum of life that's happening in front of us.
yeah, absolutely. I really, really hope that people will get something from this book, and that they will, that they'll pay attention to the people around them, that they'll help people. And I'm very, very confident that everybody will see pieces of themselves or their loved ones in these stories. And I really hope that it helps people. Admittedly, it is a bit heavy at times, but I feel that there is a positive to take from every one of those stories.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
There were 4 quotes, actually, real quick, that I wanted to share from your book that you attributed to different people from different walks of life, that people listening, including myself, could hear again. So first was from T.S. Eliot, quote, "Only those who will risk going too far can possibly find out how far one can go." Then Marty Rubin, quote, "It's not the wound that teaches, but the healing."
Mhm.
A quote from Maya Angelou, "I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it." And then the last one that I wanted to share, this was like the one that was pretty trippy to me. This was like extra multi-dimensional talk, but you attribute a quote to Rochelle Goodrich. It's, "I am not what you see. I am what time and effort and interaction slowly unveil." To me, that is like the best quote of all time. So
That's
that's
pretty
awesome. Good
incredible, isn't
stuff.
it?
Yeah, I love that one, because that to me is like that simulation talk. You know what I mean? It's like next dimension. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes actually came from the subject of the cover of the book, Brian Newman. His story wasn't included, but the quote was, "The world wants to be deceived, so let it be deceived." And I really like the way that was paired with his image. He's just got a incredibly captivating face, really draws you in. These dark, brooding eyes, and looks like kind of a character out of the Pirates of the Caribbean, at least to me. I'm curious, Wayne, as you look back on this body of work that you've put together over a very long period of time, do you have a favorite, not necessarily, a subject that you had the greatest affinity for, but just an image that you're like, damn, I'm stoked on this one. I really pushed forward the boundary of my artistry with this one. Is there anyone that has a particular point of pride?
Yeah, actually. There's one of a girl named Phoenix. She is standing in front of a refinery, and she's in full regalia. And literally that location is, I would say, 20 meters away from the actual band office for the reservation there. And so the whole reserve is surrounded by refineries. And that one stands out to me because of the whole experience of meeting this young girl. She was 8 when I photographed her, and the oldest soul I have ever experienced. I was hesitant to photograph her in this way because clearly I'm making a statement with this image with a young girl in regalia in front of a refinery.
Right.
But she knew exactly what she was doing at the age of 8, and she was wholeheartedly in and wanting to do it. And so, yeah, it's not even the images themselves, it's the experience, I think, that really stands out to me.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, even a lot of the subjects were in old age, but even the younger subjects were kind of old souls. It's an interesting symmetry there with some of the older subjects.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's like, regardless of age, it's the fact that all of these people have gone through a challenging circumstance, which to me is like how you can live a full life. So you can still live a full life even regardless of the circumstance that you're in. And I thought that was pretty interesting as well. And obviously the other thing is like, damn, we all have love in us. We just have to find it. It could be so deep, but there's something there. We just got to be able to pull out and share it with people.
Yeah, I think almost all the subjects, it seems like the way they got through their darkest hour was by turning outward. So many were focused on helping people either get through an addiction that they had experienced or get through a mental disorder that they experienced or, similar kind of trauma that they had experienced. So, it's important to turn inward and to do your inner work and kind of untangle your own BS. But at the same time, it seems like turning outward at some point and being of service to other people is a pretty integral part of healing as well. That seemed to be kind of the driving force behind a lot of these subjects that had been through just incredible trauma, things you wouldn't think that people could come back from. And the thing that gets them up in the morning is helping someone else that's been through it. I thought that was really inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you feel comfortable talking about it, but the last story of the book is the story of your mother.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about that? Because there was a question earlier, I think Jay asked, and it kind of ties to this, but how do you help someone who wants to actually have a tough, deep conversation with their parents so that that parent's story can be shared with like you, and then that story can be shared with your children? Like, Wayne, you did that with your mom, so maybe you have advice there.
Yeah. For my whole life, I didn't ever ask my mom about her past. It was something that I don't know how I knew to avoid it, but I just thought I can't go there. I think it was more out of respect. I didn't want to drag her through those memories and things. But what I didn't realize until actually sitting down and having the conversation with her, I didn't realize how freeing that would be for her to actually share that all with me. And so I would say, don't underestimate the power of, just letting someone tell their story. It comes back to listening again, I guess. I've heard it over and over and over again that it felt like they were in therapy, and it was a great experience just being able to share their story. So with my mom, that one was hard. A lot of things I didn't know and a lot of things I actually couldn't write, just for the protection of others. But to see that relief on my mom's face was a big deal.
Yeah, we had a guest on, Thomas Moore, about a month or so ago now, and his whole idea is that you don't need to be a therapist to engage in therapeutic conversation. We all can kind of provide that space for people. It's really, as you just said, about listening, about not judging, but not trying to project our own stuff onto them. It's being open to whatever their story is. And I think that's a really important message, just because it's not like people go to therapy and they have, it's like that's the only space that they can work through their stuff. It's like we can all kind of be a therapist to each other and play that role for the people that we're close to. And it sounds like, you were able to do that not only with your mom, but with so many other people, and provide an opportunity for them to get it out and unload something off their shoulders. It's, again, inspiring that all of us can be doing that. So it's awesome work.
I started doing it with my mom recently. I started asking her more questions, like, when you were a kid, like, what did you want to do? Like, what were you like as a kid? And she started opening up recently, just telling me, like, when she was a kid, she would be that one who would be playing till like the sun was going down and would have to like run back before her dad got home because her dad was super strict. And mind you, my mom grew up in India, like years ago. So very conservative. And as a, one of three sisters, all the girls were kind of like controlled or protected, I should say, not controlled, but protected in a pretty intense way. And so just hearing her and just how she would, play all day long, and then how she wanted to like be a lawyer, but that's not what women are supposed to do. So like, she was stopped from that. And so just even I'm trying a little bit with my own mom right now, just asking some more pointed questions about her childhood and what she dreamt of. And that's kind of opened up a little bit more of a different type of relationship with her.
That's great.
Well, we got one final question for you, Wayne, that we've been asking all our guests. If you could be any animal for a day, what would it be and why?
I'd be a bird. Yeah, I don't know exactly why. I would just love the feeling of flight. We all have dreams of flying.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think I'd want to be a bird.
That's great.
Just soar above and take it all in.
Yeah.
Sounds good to me.
Turns out a lot of humans want to be birds, by the way.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
But I don't know how many humans want to be. I mean, how many birds want to be humans? So.
Yeah, we can never know. Well, the book is Resilient, the Portraiture of Wayne Simpson. It's scheduled for release on September 3rd. We've talked about it here today, but you really got to see the portraiture to really understand the depth of this project. We're sure you'll enjoy it. Highly recommend you pick up a copy, pre-order it now. Wayne, thank you so much for being with us today. It was a really awesome conversation.
Oh, thank you guys. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks, Wayne. Hope to stay in touch. And speaking of portraits.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can sign up for the Rising Weekly newsletter sent out each week.
Every Friday, we expand on the episode with insights, recommendations, and more.
You can sign up at risinglatterly.com.
Thank you.